Saddam Hussein. I mean, the name alone brings up images of power, right? Palaces, a brutal dictatorship. It's a story of this incredible climb to the top. But honestly, it's the ending, the fall. That is just unbelievable.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? How does a man who literally controlled a nation's destiny, who lived in these incredibly lavish palaces, end up right here, hiding in a cramped, dark hole in the ground? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to unpack.
To really get how this happened, we can't just start at the end. We have to go way back. We need to look at the forces, the hardships that really forged the man who would become one of the 20th century's most infamous figures.
See, his story doesn't start in a palace at all. It starts in this tiny village, and it's marked by loss and, frankly, cruelty. This really tough upbringing, it wasn't just a sad backstory. No, it was the foundation for the ruthlessness that would define his entire life.
Just look at this timeline. Saddam's early life was anything but stable. He never even knew his father, he gets shuffled between relatives, and at one point ends up with an abusive stepfather. And look at that last entry. At just 10 years old, he runs away to live with his uncle, who was a really strong Arab nationalist. This is the pivotal moment, because this is where the seeds of his political ideology really start to get planted.
So, how does a boy with a past like that climb to the top? Well, he channels all that ambition and rage into radical politics. And this is where his methodical and often violent ascent really begins.
He jumps headfirst into the revolutionary Ba'ath Party and quickly starts making a name for himself. He's part of a failed assassination attempt, gets wounded, and has to flee into exile. But he doesn't give up. Oh no, he comes back, gets thrown in prison, and then he escapes. By 1968, he's a central figure in the coup that brings his party to power. And just a year later, bam, he's the vice president of Iraq. His rise was just relentless.
But you know, for a guy like Saddam, being number 2 was never going to be enough. So as vice president, he spends the next decade doing more than just governing. He's building his own power base, creating this web of security forces and informants, making sure every lever of power in Iraq leads right back to him.
And then, in July of '79, he makes his move. He basically forces the aging president to resign, and just like that, Saddam Hussein is the undisputed ruler of Iraq. And his very first move as president, it was a chilling preview of the terror that was about to come.
Okay, picture this. Just days into his presidency, he calls a big meeting of Ba'ath Party officials. And what happens next is pure, terrifying political theater. A former comrade gives this forced confession, naming dozens of people in the room as conspirators. And just like this quote says, Saddam, calmly smoking a cigar, starts reading off the names. One by one, they're dragged out of the room. And the whole thing? It was filmed and broadcast to the entire nation.
The message was brutally clear. 22 high-ranking officials were executed immediately. This wasn't just a purge, it was a public spectacle of power, designed to make everyone absolutely terrified. After that day, nobody dared to challenge Saddam Hussein.
So, with his power totally locked down at home, Saddam starts looking abroad. His reign would become defined by 2 absolutely catastrophic wars that didn't just drain Iraq's resources, but put him on a direct collision course with the rest of the world.
First, you've got the Iran-Iraq War in 1980. He was scared of Iran's Islamic Revolution spreading, so he invades. That war drags on for 8 brutal years, ends in a stalemate, and leaves Iraq with massive debt. So, how does he try to solve his money problems? He invades his oil-rich neighbor Kuwait in 1990. But this time, the world fought back. A US-led coalition freed Kuwait, and Iraq got hit with these devastating international sanctions.
These wars basically made Saddam an international pariah. Then, after the 9/11 attacks, the US invades Iraq in 2003, saying they feared he had weapons of mass destruction. Baghdad fell fast, but Saddam was gone, vanished. And that kicked off one of the biggest manhunts in modern history.
The mission to find him was called Operation Red Dawn. For months, US forces were on the hunt, raiding safe houses, interrogating his inner circle. But this is a man who built his entire career on secrecy and paranoia. He was proving to be a ghost.
So how did they find him?
Well, as you can see from these steps, the breakthrough came from good old-fashioned intelligence work. Analysts started noticing the same name popping up in interrogations, Ibrahim al-Muslit. They capture him, and he spills. He reveals 2 farmhouses near Tikrit, and that's where soldiers found it, a camouflaged hole in the ground. And then, they heard a sound from inside, a cough. When they pulled the cover back, there he was, a disheveled man in a tiny hole. And his first words? Not defiance, not anger, he was a deal maker. I am Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate. But the time for making deals was long, long over. Saddam was put on trial. And look, the list of potential charges against him was huge. The war with Iran, gas-encouraged civilians, the invasion of Kuwait. But to make sure they got a swift conviction, prosecutors decided to focus on a single, really well-documented case of crimes against humanity. And that case was the Dujail massacre. Back in 1982, after someone tried to assassinate him, Saddam's regime retaliated by executing 148 men and boys from the town of Dujail. The evidence was just undeniable, and it's this single act of brutality that would end up sealing his fate.
And as you can see here, the end came really fast. He's found guilty in November 2006 and executed just a month later. And in a final, kind of poetic twist, his body was buried in Al-Awaja, the very same village where his violent journey began all those years ago.
And so we're back where we started, from a palace to a spider hole. His life was, without a doubt, a product of a brutal childhood, radical ideas, and just unchecked ambition. But the question that history will always ask is this: was Saddam Hussein just a product of his violent times, or was he a uniquely destructive force who bent the world to his will? Well, that's a question for all of us to think about.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.